Any thoughts you have on MDMA? Like, what do you know about it at all?
I know it's ecstasy, right? And I've had MDMA is Molly. MDA is ecstasy, right?
I think it's a really great way to let loose and just have an overall great body experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a good time, and it's a party, and it's fun, and it's fun, and it's fun, and oh my God, it's so fun, and oh my God.
It's more of like a party drug, I guess. It kind of intensifies feelings, emotions, anything you really kind of want it to intensify.
Yeah, what kind of fears do you have about it?
None, really.
I think it would be a unique way to let go of some of your insecurities and fears.
I don't really know. It has kind of a negative reputation, but if there's some positive use for it, then that's great.
That is the one drug I don't really have too many fears about.
It's starting to have some possible medical uses.
You know, it's just mainly a street drug from what I understand, just as far as how it's put together.
I would be scared to go to a party and take it because I've heard of people who've died.
I think that it can cause a hangover from time to time, but that's about it.
I think there's just a line that you cross when it comes to certain drugs and how they're put together. So that's where I would probably say I would draw the line on something like that.
In the 70s and early 80s, MDMA was actually really used for psychotherapy. So it was discovered before, and so it was actually very widely used. And then it became known as ecstasy in the street. And started being used widely in raves, especially, and in Texas. And so the government was alarmed by it, and in 1985 it was placed on Schedule 1, meaning that it had no therapeutic value, it had no potential for research, and we couldn't use it at all. And slowly, very, very slowly, that began to change. My name is Marcela Otalora, and I'm a psychotherapist. I work mostly with trauma, and I have a private practice in Boulder. So MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. We treated 28 participants, and we always have a combination of female and male co-therapists. And then we do the first treatment, and that treatment is 8 hours long. Then we stay with them, and they go through a process. They lay down, and they go through a process of going inside and having their own insights and not talking. Usually they have their eyes closed. There's a lot of insights that happen. You know, people just make these amazing connections that they hadn't made before, because the PTSD doesn't really allow for people to learn new things. You know, they can't be in the present moment, and they're always guarded. And so one of the things that they mostly feel at the beginning that everybody says is there is a sense of well-being, even though maybe the trauma is coming up.
You know, my entire family used to be in the military. That's how actually how my mother and father met. So I grew up and realized at a very young age, you know, the freedoms and liberties this country has afforded me and a lot of other Americans. A lot of people in the military treat PTSD as if it's like this medal or this badge to be won, you know, but like, who wants to win that, right? So it took me like 1.5 years to seek treatment for it. But even then, I wasn't really even doing it for myself. I was doing it more as like a plea to other people. I ended up joining the Army, been between junior and senior year of high school. Ended up like going to basic about 2 weeks after I graduated high school. And you know, I was always kind of wanting to be a doctor when I grew up. So like, how could I end up, you know, doing the best of both worlds? You know, like being a doctor and joining the military. So I decided I'd join as a combat medic, and then that way I would deploy either Iraq or Afghanistan, and if I came back and I still wanted to be a doctor, then that's a career path that I would ultimately end up pursuing. It was the best job I ever had, and it was also the worst job I ever had. The hardest adjustment for me when I was coming home, I didn't really, I guess, realize this till the MDMA sessions, but it was kind of just living with this severed connection between my heart and my head. I was dealing with a lot of things, and I didn't really even realize I had much of a problem, or I was telling myself I didn't have much of a problem, so it's really just kind of a blur. Life was just difficult to live back then, and I was just angry at everything, and I didn't feel anything. So a lot of my emotions were more of like secondary emotions, and they were the ones kind of controlling my life. A great example was once I came back from Afghanistan, we had like 30 days of leave, okay? I was a 19-year-old kid just coming back from Afghanistan, so I went to Disney World, of course, you know. And we went to go see like one of the fireworks shows, and I wasn't even thinking at the time. We got there early, we were like in the middle of like this huge crowd of people, and the fireworks show started going off, and it freaked me out. And like I would just see like it wasn't bringing me back to Afghanistan, but I would just see like, I guess, the result of that explosion on somebody else, right? And then like the next one would go off and I'd see the other result, and it was just like to where I couldn't really see anything, and I was freaking out. I was pushing myself through the crowd. So I kept pushing myself through the crowd until I saw this worker. It was like this little 16-year-old worker. I grabbed her on the shoulder, turned around. I was just like, listen, I just got back from Afghanistan. These fireworks are freaking me out. And her eyes just got really big. She didn't know what to do. She ended up just pointing towards a random building. And I ran in there and like waited in the bathroom until it was over. You know, over there, like to survive, you have to end up separating the connection between your heart and your head, you know. Because if you try to like just process all this like death that you're seeing and destruction, like along with your heart, that's just not going to work out, right? So I'd end up like cutting that, so I felt nothing, you know. And I knew I loved my wife with all my heart, but I couldn't feel it. I knew I loved my mother and father dearly, but I couldn't feel it. And it was just constantly not feeling anything. I did like all the normal stuff, talking to psychologists every other week, and weeks in between those, talking to psychiatrists, getting prescribed meds. I did group therapy, which was like from like 9 to 4. I did alpha stimulation, PM, like 5 days a week. Isn't as scary as it sounds. It's like where they put these electrodes between your ears and shoot an electrical impulse to your brain. I did hypnosis, which I was really surprised that the Department of Defense sponsored, and then I also did prolonged exposure, which is kind of which was a nightmare for me, but I can't. So I was like doing all these things, and one after the other was failing, and I kind of just like accepted my life sentence. And I searched MDMA, and there was a couple results, and I saw MDMA to treat PTSD, and I was just like, whoa. And you know, it was in Boulder, Colorado, where I was about to move, and it just kind of felt like fate at that point. My biggest fear and what concerned me the most about my PTSD was losing my life. And I don't mean that in a suicidal way at all, but like losing my family, losing my wife, losing like my dreams of what, you know, who I was wanting to be and what I was wanting to accomplish after the military. Before, when I had like PTSD, it was like I was in this cave and I had no light source, I had no nothing. It was just pitch black, and I was kind of feeling along the walls, trying to find my way out. I'd hit dead ends, get turned around. But, you know, the MDMA was like this light, and the therapists with me were like, you know, these like guides almost. And I could kind of like see around the cave and figure out how to get out of there. You know, it was just really helpful.
When a person has trauma, what we've learned is that the prefrontal cortex gets more shut down. So you can no longer really make sense of things. And with MDMA, by having that be active, that's how then you get a lot of insights. You know, you get to use your intelligence. You get to really understand how the trauma affected your life, and maybe even things that you didn't know and that you didn't, connections that you didn't make before.
And you know, my work with MAPS and MDMA, it did almost the same thing that the Army did for me. It helped me figure out who I was again. It helped me figure out what I was wanting to do with my life, and you know, it gave me a drive. It's my life's calling, I feel like.
I mean, PTSD is a term that I don't think I had heard of until I was well into having it. You know, I'd done lots of therapy over the years, and so I feel like I've had PTSD since as long as I can remember having memories of my life. You know, I suffered great abuse from a very young age, and so as early as 5, and I remember clearly being, you know, waking up in the night with night terrors. My parents were both heroin addicts, and I remember my mother telling me that while she was pregnant with me, even she was doing drugs and did LSD and smoked pot and drank and did pills, and I mean, I just think the fact that I came out in one piece is a miracle. One of the things I've realized now is quite naturally a 5-year-old kid is looking for some kind of mental stimulation, somebody to engage with. And one particular set of neighbors kind of groomed me in a way. They would feed me champagne, and the champagne led to various states of undress and led to actually being raped and molested by several people. At that age, I think it's a safety thing with our bodies and our psyches. We shut down, and that's what I did. I was not present for a lot of it, and so that's what saved me, I think. Well, both my parents ended up committing suicide. My dad when I was 7, and then my mom when I was 12. You know, really quite quickly after that began my own cycle of abuse, self-abuse, hypersexual behavior. And basically, when I had my first child at age 27, I was still, you know, partying. I was a partier. But it was at that point that I started therapy, and I literally spent decades in therapy and various kinds of therapies. I'd heard about the MDMA trials, and I remember thinking it was just, you know, another bolder kind of hippie thing. And because of my own issues around addiction and you know, using drugs and not wanting to take a risk of going back down that path that I'd worked so hard to get out of, I was really resistant to the thought that this might be helpful for me. And the more I read about it and the more I talked to people who were running the trials, the more I thought that maybe there was a chance that this could help me after all these years of nothing making me feel better. And what I found is that through the MDMA and the therapy, I was able to look at these things, and it was actually easier than all the work of keeping it down and keeping it all at bay and keeping it shut. It's not like I saw as a hallucination, but more a feeling that came up of me as a beautiful bud on a stem, on a really strong stem. And seeing, because so much of my life has been spent beating myself up and feeling like a piece of shit, and you know, I'm not good enough and ashamed and all the stuff that comes from having that kind of trauma. In that moment on that couch, I saw how I am not fucked up, and I'm really okay. And yeah, you know, I've been beat up, but the core of me is whole and pure and good, just like everyone else in the world. And so it was really a huge deal. And I literally could feel my heart opening up and swelling with love for myself for the first time. And that was huge.
So the potential for MDMA is one, that we can really treat people with PTSD and hopefully other conditions, and that it can be a choice, that it can be available as a choice for people to make, to say that it's not going to be for everybody, but that they can make a choice to be able to use MDMA to heal from PTSD.